Hey, this is Travis Hornsby, and you're watching the Best Practices Show.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the Best Practices Show, where we take a look at the best business practices from the best dental practices anywhere. And you know this, if you're a dentist watching this right now, debt is a major concern for a lot of you. It could be student debt, it could be additional debt, and your question might be, well, what do I do? And today you're gonna see I got a great expert help us think a little bit better about student debt. And I was asking Travis beforehand, and he said, let's call this one, should you pay almost nothing on your student loans? So we're going to ask him what that means here in a second. And Travis, that's a great title for a podcast. So you do not want to miss this. So do me a favor, grab a pen and hit the share button. You're going to love this. But before we get started, Travis, I always love to have you tell your story a little bit. I've been getting to know you a little bit here and who you are as dentists are listening to this. I want to give them a good understanding of why they're going to want to listen. So Travis, who are you?
Well, I'm a recovering bond trader and Excel nerd. And so my girlfriend had a lot of student loan debt, and I was doing all this bond trading $10 billion of like municipal, tax exempt bonds, making really rich people even richer. And I was kind of like, well, this is not my calling, I think. And then I found out that there's all these forgiveness plans, all this complicated student loan mess that was out there. And it was kind of fun to build a spreadsheet to figure out what to do for our own situation, because there's all these different forgiveness plans and refinancing and that kind of thing. So anyways, my father-in-law gave me an ultimatum, and he's basically like, I took a sabbatical, traveled around the world, and he's like, you got to go make an income again, or else I'm not going to come to the wedding. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, oh shoot. And so I didn't want to go back to, doing what I was doing. So I thought, well, I just got to make this thing successful. And so we had gotten some media love from some of the stuff I'd shared online. And so we just went after it. And now we're at like 800 million of student loan debt that we've advised. So it's kind of been a fun ride.
That's crazy. That's a lot of student loan debt. Now, before we get into this, because I've got so many questions, I'm going to ask you about this. This is a big topic. We coach a lot of dentists, a lot of young ones coming out. I see huge amounts of debt, more than I've ever seen. And even myself, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is a lot of debt. But I want to talk about the why before we get into the how. And why is the student loan conversation so important for professionals like dentists now in the market?
Well, it's just higher than it's ever been, and it's getting even higher, right? So you have unlimited borrowing. Since 2006, you can take out as much as you want for school, and the schools know that, so they jack the prices up. So now, for example, one of the schools that's popular one, NYU, we're projecting people are going to leave with $700,000 in dental school debt in 2023 when this class graduates. It's entering this fall.
That is crazy. Like that's a number higher than I was even anticipating. And I want you to, we talked about this a little bit before we went live here. I want you to share with us, like, what can we expect? You hear all these numbers. I hear from UMKC about what their average debt load is. And you had mentioned there's a difference when you're listening to that statistic. You really got to understand the nature of the statistic between median and mean. Explain, like, what's the state of student debt outside of just what you mentioned, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so like the average dental school debt's like $280,000, right? And so that sounds bad, but dentists, a lot of them make decent money. And so even though the associate might start out at $120K, you still might be able to make a decent income, and pay that back theoretically, right? So you're looking at the average debt statistic and thinking, okay, well, it's not as bad as people are making it out to be. But the problem with that is if you look at the median debt for dental school, it's about 50 grand higher than the average. So on a typical. So in other words, like the median debt is around 330, your average debt might be around 280. So what that means is that you've got what's called a biased statistic. So think about back to your like fourth grade math class, right? Mm-hmm. Like your median is your 50th percentile. Half the people owe more, half the people owe less. And then if your average is sensitive to large and small values. So if your average is smaller than the median, that means there's a whole bunch of small values that are put into that equation to make that average way lower than the median. And so what that's telling you is that you can't make a decision based off of average student loan debt if you got that number even from your school, because that's representing a whole bunch of people that got help from Dr. Mom or Dr. Dad, that might have covered a significant portion of their expenses, or their spouses might have done that. So that means that the real debt that you need to be looking at is what's on the cost of attendance on the school's website. So for somebody that's going to borrow the full amount, which is really most people that don't come from means, right? Go look at the cost of attendance for the school's website and then multiply that by 1.25. That's a number that we've looked at as representing all the interest, all the fees, all the hidden stuff going on. So if you take the 4-year cost of attendance and multiply it by 1.25, you're going to get a good idea of what you're going to graduate with in debt. Okay. So that number is very frequently $100,000 or $200,000 higher than whatever that average dental school debt stat they give you is.
Okay, and then help us understand this, because I just have one kid in college, and I'm understanding this. Like, what you see on the website is never what you pay. Like, it's always way more than that. And I've saved into 520. Talk about the undergraduate debt. I mean, is this in consideration? Is this in addition to? Is it separate, or is this all grouped together?
Well, that's just separate. I mean, the undergrad debt is, on average, like $35,000, something like that. And the problem with the undergrad debt is the kids are limited as to how much they can borrow, but the parents are not. So parents will often do Parent Plus loans. They'll do private loans. So it's not uncommon for a parent to have a whole bunch of debt too, on top of what the kid borrowed for undergrad, and then you're going to dental school with the big debt. But the good news is like most people for undergrad, they're a little careful. Like, not a ton of parents are willing to sacrifice their retirement for their kids to go to a nicer school. I mean, parents will chip in like, a new car, right? They'll chip in like 40, 50 grand, but they won't chip in usually, a 6-figure amount. So, the undergrad stuff is really not the problem. The problem for undergrad debt is like the people who like don't finish. I mean, that's like the student loan crisis, is the people who are not getting jobs because they're working as baristas because they dropped out. Yeah. The problem on the other end of the spectrum is the people who have the gigantic balances from graduate school, like dentists, that a lot of times could not afford to pay it back without the aid of different government forgiveness and income-based repayment programs.
Holy moly. Now you're really stressing me out. Okay. So now I got to go back. There's so many things you said here. Is it true that the highest unemployment rate in the United States is college graduates? Like, is that true? I mean, you're a data guy. I mean, I hear that. I don't know if that's true. I just thought I'd ask, but you're talking about the barista who has got all this debt, but really never did anything with the education. And the other thing too, if you do that and you go to dental school, so if my daughter wants to go to dental school, I mean, we're talking about a lot of dough, but they got to start paying all of this back. So let me pause there and just, can you speak to a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's not true. I mean, if you look at the stats, the highest unemployment rate is for people who dropped out of high school. And then the second worst unemployment rate is for people that finished high school. And then the third worst employment rate is for people that did the associates, and then the bachelor's. And then the professional and doctorate is at the very bottom of the list. So people that finish graduate school, the unemployment rate is always a fraction of what it is for other people. The problem, if you have a graduate degree, is not getting employed. It's whether or not the employment you find was worth what you borrowed for it.
That is so true. That is spot on. Now, this is further complicated by the fact, you're going to have to help us with this. When it comes to the interest rates, like the interest rates used to be, what were they, 2.3%, 2.5% in the early 2000s. What are they now, and why?
So back in like the early 2000s, there was this bank student loan program that was insured by the government. It's called the FFEL loan program, or the FFEL loan program. And basically the government created a system where, you could consolidate these loans and get them on like a 2 or a 3% kind of interest rate for a 30-year repayment plan. So naturally that's lower than inflation. So pretty much all the dentists around were just putting it on a 30-year plan at 2 or 3% and just letting it take the full time to pay it back, just because the cost of the debt was so cheap, right? And then also you couldn't necessarily borrow as much as you wanted, so it was a lot easier to not come out of school with massive balances because the cost was a lot less. What changed is in 2007, they basically rewrote the whole rule book and basically said, let's make it so that we have interest rates that are going to be a certain amount above what the government borrows. So whatever the government borrows at, you're going to borrow at 3 or 4% higher than what the government borrows at. And that was designed to try to help improve access to college. So basically the idea was, okay, well, the interest rate isn't the problem. It's people can't afford the payment. So we're going to create income-based repayment. We're going to make this public service loan forgiveness. We're going to make it so that you can get your debt forgiven in 25 years if you don't do a not-for-profit job. And we're just going to totally rewrite the rule book, okay? So that was in 2007. 2010, President Obama said, well, let's take this government loan program and let's have it do everything. So instead of having it be a portion of the market where the banks are involved for a big part of it, let's cut those banks out, and now all of it's going to be a direct federal loan. So since 2010, the government has really been the source of the vast majority of funding for education for dental school. And the changes that happened down the pipeline later on kept the interest rate kind of unchanged. It's just always the same kind of margin above what the government borrows at. And then you just have access to additional repayment programs that have become more and more generous since 2010. So you have, the 10% program for 20 years instead of a 15% program for 25. So that happened in the mid 2000s. Then there was a program that would let you get subsidies that came about in like the mid to late 2010s. And so, it's just been getting more and more generous in terms of forgiveness while the interest rate has gotten worse.
That's crazy. Now, I want to go back. You said a couple things. What is the forgiveness plan? Because we hear those terms. I hear them, first of all, can you just define what is a forgiveness plan and exactly what does it do?
The only way to get your debt forgiven, besides one of these, underserved things, or joining the military or doing the National Health Service Corps, the main way to get your debt forgiven is to pay based on your income for a set number of years. And then after that period of years that you paid based on your income, the debt is wiped away. And under the current tax code, if you do that in the private sector, that debt that gets wiped away is basically taxable as if it were a bonus. So there's a section of the IRS code that says discharged debt is basically taxable income, right? And so this has really never been tested, but you can look at that and say, well, okay, you're going to have to pay 40% on your forgiven debt in 20 years. And then along the way, you'll pay 10% of your AGI, and that total amount of money is that amount of money less than paying it back directly? So that's forgiveness, is basically when you do that math and you find that the total out-of-pocket cost is less than if you paid it back directly, then you can make that amount of money out of your pocket even less and try to pay even less on your student loans to lower your overall cost.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about that when it comes to the associate thing, but there's so many things that I get asked, and I don't know the answers, so I'm just going to ask you. Now, there's incentives for young dentists. So if you're a young dentist and you're going to dental school and you got all this debt, there are incentives for you to go to underserved areas. And some people think, this is a great idea. Can you just give us the truth on this? Like, you don't have to sugarcoat anything. Is this a good thing for dentists to do? Not a good thing? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when you go to these underserved areas and you're working for a public health kind of environment, you're working your tail off. I mean, you're going to get a lot of experience, so that's a good thing if you're looking for, doing a whole bunch of clinical volume. So that's a good part. But the problem with that is you're not building equity in a practice. You're not an owner. You're just an employee. And furthermore, you're going to get exhausted doing fill and drill dentistry for the most part. I would say that the vast majority, probably 95% of our folks that do public health dentistry quit after a few years because it's just so exhausting physically. And so, what we'll see is people will go do this for $50,000 or $100,000, but they might owe $500,000, and that doesn't really make that big of a dent. And then furthermore, that $50,000 to $100,000 that they got forgiven, if they had done that income-based forgiveness thing, then all they're getting is that $50,000 to $100,000 that would have been forgiven. They're basically just saving the taxes on that in 20 years by doing this NHSC program. So you're saving like 40% of $100,000, which is $40,000, and you're saving that in 20 years, right? So the value of that adjusted for inflation, might only be like 10, 20 grand, something like that, which is really nothing to uproot your life over. So, we had a case where there was this couple, both of them were dentists. One of them wanted to do this forgiveness thing because they were so stressed about the debt. And they lived apart. They lived like 3 hours apart, I think. I think it was either that or they lived in the same place, and both of them had like an hour and a half commute in the opposite direction. And they were miserable about it. And they were like, well, I got to do it because, my debt's so bad. And then I explained to them that they actually didn't need to do it at all. And in fact, it was only saving them kind of that 10, 20K number for all that sacrifice. And their minds were just blown. So I think that the underserved thing, I mean, if you want to serve an underserved population, that's great. But there's plenty of profitable ways to do it. You can go to rural Iowa and open a clinic with a startup, probably with a couple $100,000 of capital, and probably produce 500 grand to $1 million in revenue within maybe a year or two. And you're serving an underserved population, but you're getting paid for it. So, I mean, that would be kind of my suggestion versus, letting these loan forgiveness programs try to entice you.
Yeah. And Travis, I think that's a great thing you just said, and very important. Like, they're doing a great service. I don't ever want anybody to hear that. Serving an underserved area, we need that. We definitely need that. One of the decisions you have to make as a young dentist is, this a good life move for me? I know if I would have dated my wife long distance, she would have never married me. There's no way. And so I wanted to have kids, and so did she. So you got to put that in play. There's two other things I want to ask you about too, because I get these questions from dentists. There's so much marketing from the DSOs. And DSOs serve a population too that's different than private practice, but the incentives financially are very enticing for somebody to go work for a DSO and work a long time, like, we'll help you pay. And I've had many experts on the show say, hey, look, you're going to make money in a DSO, but you're going to make way more money working in private practice. Would you agree, disagree? Like, give me your thoughts on that.
I would say that I totally agree with that. The only exception would be if somebody's got a confidence problem. So a lot of these folks, like, that are part of like DSOs that will do sort of partnerships. Well, they'll get a percentage of the revenue for managing the business aspects of the practice. I mean, I think that maybe like there's a chance that those folks would be associates long-term because they just don't have the confidence to take it to that next level. But golly, I just think it's dumb to partner with a DSO to do 50% revenue for, managing the business side of your practice. Because why would you do that when you could go hire a group like you guys or another, practice management consultant that's going to charge a flat 10 grand or 20 grand or whatever it is, right? And instead of that, you give somebody freaking 50% of all your revenue, $400K a year, just to hire and fire people, and just to, have a software system for billing and doing a allowance for doubtful accounts when you could hire a freaking CPA. Like, are people stupid? I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but like, that's kind of my impression. It's like, and a lot of times folks will kind of have this swagger, like, ooh, I partnered with, fill in the blank DSO. I'm going to own 4 practices. No, you're not. You're basically just a revenue share employee for this group. And yeah, you'll make more money than as an associate. So, I mean, if that's what you want to do, great. But you're not going to make nearly as much money, because if you look at dental practice loans, 0.3% default rate. That's what the bankers tell me. So 3 in 1,000, and I heard one podcast that was a little bit, joking, but they said that of the 3 that fail out of 1,000 dentists, 2 of them failed because they couldn't put down their bottles and their pill boxes. So 1 in 1,000 failed for business reasons. So restaurants, 50% of them fail, and so it's kind of like, if you don't suck, you're going to do really, really well as a dentist. And the only exceptions, like the only places we've seen dentists having a bad time have been in the most saturated areas of the country. So we've seen dentists in northern New Jersey and San Francisco. We've seen some dentists there doing very poorly because the cost of their real estate is like ridiculous. The cost of their labor for the people at the front desk is insane because they're competing against, Google paying janitors $100 an hour, and so those folks, like they can struggle. Like, so if you're in a high cost of living area, like maybe be careful, like eyes wide open, it's going to not be as easy. Right. But like, just one last example, I had a client in Beverly Hills that was like, 3 bad Yelp reviews would end my practice. And then meanwhile, I had a guy in like rural Texas, and I asked him if his clients, could hurt him on Yelp. And he said, Yelp. Is that what happens when you step on a dog's tail? In other words, totally irrelevant. And he was producing like $1 million, $1.5 million in revenue because that's where people needed his services. So I just think that I'm very pro own your own practice, and I think the data backs it up. And I think that if you want to do the DSO route because it makes you less stressed, I guess that's worth something. I would just want to challenge anybody that thinks that that's a better path.
Travis, I like you. Like, I like the way you talk. I like the way you think. Obviously, we share, similar core values in this whole respect, or at least vantage points from this. And I totally agree. And you said it earlier. I tell dentists this all the time. So for your young dentists watching this, the most expensive money you'll ever pay anybody is called equity. And the best money you'll ever make is called equity. That's the future in any business, because you are going to work your tail off no matter what you do. And you're going to want to own as much of that. That will pay huge dividends long term. It'll also cause you less stress because you now have fewer decision makers, I think. But that's my own opinion. I don't mind when people get in partnerships, do all that kind of stuff. They just got to be doing it for the right reasons, not for coverage or stupid things like that. I mean, there's a lot of considerations if you're a young dentist watching this that you've got to take in, because I feel like a lot of these dentists that we're coaching or talking to, they're numb to the debt thing. Like one kid came to me, he's got like 1.4 worth of debt. He's like, don't worry, I know I'm going to pay this all off. I'm like, dude, do you know how this works? And you've got other complexities too. You've got, Wisconsin is a community property state. Others are not. Like dentists have to know that. Like, tell us about that. What is that, and why do you need to know that information?
Well, yeah. So there's this example of a guy. He was making about $300,000, getting 30% of collections, and I'll show you how different debt can be different kinds of bad. So he had a lot of credit card debt. So he had like $50K of credit card debt, and he was obviously worried about it. But I was saying, what's the problem with that credit card debt? Is it's preventing you from getting a practice loan, because nobody's going to want to give you a practice loan with $50,000 of credit card debt. And then what that's costing you is, specialists usually have 50% overhead. So, you're costing yourself an extra $200,000 in salary because of this $50K credit card debt. So yeah, the interest rate might be whatever it is. That doesn't matter. What you're doing is that $50,000 of credit card debt that you might have used to pay for the vacation or the medical bills, whatever you used it for, that's costing you 4 times that annually. So that's how bad that debt is. You got to, act like your hair's on fire for that debt. Meanwhile, student debt is totally different. You can always pay based on your income for student debt. You can put student debt into forbearance. You can pause payments. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. So like, for example, with Wisconsin, so say that guy does make $500,000, right? And he has got $500,000 of student loan debt. There's 2 different strategies that you would use depending on which of the 2 offices you guys have you're located near. So if you're in you have Kansas and Wisconsin offices, right? So a dentist in Kansas, $500K income, $500K debt, you're going to probably need to pay that back. And you're probably going to want to look for a refinancing deal. You might start off with a 10 to 20 year term and then refinance it again, get cash bonuses, get rate discounts, all kinds of things, right? So that would be a good plan. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, that person that lives in Wisconsin, let's say that he's married to a stay-at-home spouse.
Right.
So in that case, you can file your taxes separately. And furthermore, you can equally distribute your income on both, basically with both spouses. So each spouse makes $250K, right? Okay. And so then you can pay based off of $250K instead of $500K for your pay-as-you-earn payment. So in other words, you could pay around $1,500 to $2,000 a month on your loans in Wisconsin. Meanwhile, in Kansas, you'd have to be paying $5,000 a month on your loans.
Wow.
Right? So that's a real nuance, that is available because of the state-specific tax law. So the thing that practice owner could do in Wisconsin is, if they're making $500,000, they could set up a cash-funded pension plan, right?
Right.
So they could write off maybe $100,000 off their income. And let's say that would save you a percentage on your student loan too, because your student loan payment is based off of your adjusted gross income.
Okay.
And say that $500,000 practice owner too owned a building. You could write off a percent of the depreciation of the building every year. You could also do practice business interest and depreciation on dental equipment. So there would be a way to get that person in Wisconsin from $500K of income maybe down to $300, and then split that in half. Now you're paying on $150K. And so then your payment on your student loans is probably $1,000 a month. So you could be paying $5,000 a month in one case, or you could be paying $1,000 a month. And even if you tack on like that projected, future taxes that you might owe, you might only be talking about an extra $500 a month into a index fund or something like that to cover that future tax hit. So $1,500 versus $5,000 a month. That's like a brand new, I don't know, I'm off of the luxury car market, but that's like a 3 or 5 series or something, right?
I don't even know what that means. Like, I'm off of it too. I'm thinking I would buy a nice little road bike or something like that, but or a Peloton. You could buy a Peloton every month with that difference. You totally could. Now, this is really important because that's a big deal. And I'm guessing, Travis, this is where you're going. Like, you just shared a little bit of insight, but one of the things, the title of this podcast is, should you pay almost nothing on your student loans? We didn't mean pay zero. I mean, this is where it's at. And then you said you said, I'm going to quote you before we got started. You know, these dentists need to know how you could make twice as much as your associate, but you would pay less than them in student debt. And this is what you're talking about, right?
Exactly. So let's just give an example. So if you got an associate, they're W-2 and they have all their income reported. There's no way to write all of it off. They make what they make, right?
Right.
And let's say you make twice as much as them on paper. Well, the thing is your student loan payment is based off of your adjusted gross income. That's what it's based off of, not your, your actual earnings, right? Not what you would want to give to a seller, to a buyer if you were trying to sell your dental practice. You would give them the taxable earnings if to the IRS and the actual, earnings to the buyer of a practice. So there's ways to write off a lot of things as a practice owner, right? Depending on how aggressive your CPA is and depending on what you want to do, but you could write off, like I said, the building, the practice interest. You could write off all these equipment stuff, different kinds of maybe CE courses. You can write off just the cash pension plan, which you could have as a monster contribution later on. So you could make your taxable income less than the associate as a practice owner, whereas that's not possible as the associate because you're getting wage income. You can't hide wage income. It is what it is. So, there's very limited ways you can hide it. Let's put it that way. Maybe a little bit of a 401k contribution, but that's pretty much it. So in other words, if that practice owner is able to get their taxable income below their associate, since the payment of their student loans under something like a pay or a repay plan is based off of that 10% of AGI, you're basically getting a lower number than the associate for taxable income, which would mean that you would be paying less on your student loans, even though you're making twice as much.
That is brilliant. And again, my brain hurts thinking about all this because that is so powerful, especially being a young dentist. Now, I got to ask you this, because I've been doing this for more than 25 years. You hear speaker after speaker after speaker talk about paying down debt and saving money. Do you know what I mean? And most all of them agree the debt, you're going to want to pay that down, but don't get crazy focused on paying the debt down because you're better off. Now, tell me if you agree with this. You're better off borrowing money and putting it over here and saving and making interest on than putting all of your resources into getting rid of your debt. I'm not, brilliant like you in this respect, but give us your opinion on that.
Well, people's attitude and their behavior is what matters the most, basically. So the thing is like a lot of popular personal finance people that I won't name basically say, you got to get rid of all your debt right now. You're going to sell everything. You should never borrow for anything. And if you do, you're stupid. And, so the thing that he's doing is he's tricking you into having a high savings rate. So emotionally, when you're not spending the money on stuff you want to buy, you're spending it on your net worth, which is the same thing as growing your net worth, right? And so that's kind of a sort of an emotion-based approach to money. And a lot of us are emotion-based creatures, which is why that stuff's so popular. But if you look at the reality of it, it's way smarter to go out and borrow, money to make 50% of the revenue in a practice instead of 30%. That's a wonderful decision. And when you have all these business loans working out fine, it would be stupid to work for somebody forever and trying to save up the money to pay in cash, especially when you can deduct that in interest. It's tax deductible interest. So the return you'd have to get in the stock market to beat that, it's probably only like 2 or 3%,
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can almost get that in a bank account. So it's kind of like, well, why would you be so stressed? And we see this too with like kind of transition plans with associates and owners. Like sometimes the associate will work for like an X number of years to build up, equity that they can use to buy the practice. And it's kind of like, why? Like, why would you do that? Just the bank will give you the loan, and the bank is not trying to act in the interest of the seller. They're trying to just give you whatever you think you need. And so you want the CPA behind you or the consultant behind you to make sure that you're not overpaying or paying something dumb. But I think that I'm always a fan of borrowing for things that can grow your income, and for things that can't grow your income, I'm a fan of treating them like consumption items. And the thing that I tell docs is you really only have to be careful with your cars and your house. Everything else, I guess the third thing would be try to stay married.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I tell people that's the fastest way to go broke. And then if you get divorced twice, you're really broke. Yes. And if you get divorced a third time, you don't have anything. And I get dentists, well, where should I invest my money? I'm a big fan of what you just said today, like equity, number one, even if it's a scratch start, like it might be a little bit harder road, but you'll be okay. Number two, invest in your health. Like, stay healthy, because your ability to make an income is greatly dependent on how healthy you stay. And number three, invest in your marriage. Take your spouse away once a quarter and say, this is important to me, like whatever. So dude, you're singing my song. I love this.
Yeah.
Or now I'm going to be singing your song. I love this. Love this. What other thoughts? Like, I know you have a lot of thoughts, and I'm definitely going to have you back, and we're going to go into the micro aspects of this. So what other thoughts, if I'm a 32-year-old dentist and I'm watching this and my brain hurts too, what would you say to a 32-year-old dentist who's out a little bit, but still has the debt, like and still has 3 decades in front of them?
You just got to figure out what you want. I mean, do you want to work fewer hours? Do you want to try to, make a bunch of different practice locations? Do you want to have an empire? Do you why? What is your why? Like, why do you do what you do? You want to have a family? You want to own a house? You want to take more vacations? Like, you got to figure that kind of big kind of self-actualization stuff out. And then you can absolutely make whatever student loan problem you're dealing with match that. So if you want to work less, remember I said your student loan payment can be based off of your adjusted gross income. You can get that number down super low. You can basically make your loan like a tax instead of a debt. And, people like to complain about taxes, but it's not something that sends people into anxiety attacks usually.
Right.
Unless you don't have any money, you haven't saved to pay them. I guess that's a different thing. Yeah. But when your student loan is like a tax, well, then it's like, can I live on $100,000 a year? If I can, then my student loan's 15% of that, give or take, with the tax bomb included. And so now I can work 3 days a week. Like, that's one thing. That 32-year-old, there's a lot of practices out there that are like $300,000 to $400,000 practices that probably would get net income of like $150K, and they're 2 or 3 day a week practices, but nobody wants to buy them because everybody thinks that they need to make, $300,000 because of their loans, and the DSOs don't want to buy them because it's just not worth their time. But those are amazing lifestyle practices for some people out there. And maybe the 32-year-old wants to make a lot of money to try to have financial independence at the earliest age possible, where work is optional. So we'll show them how to do that. So, I mean, I think that the 32-year-old, I think, just has to realize that, just figure out what your biggest dream is, and then try to make your money match that by having a higher savings rate and having paid off cars and a house 2 times your joint household income.
Yeah. I'm sure you see this. People go, well, I have $300,000 of the debt. Well, then when you make them do the homework, it's not 300,000. Oh, it's 327. I knew it was in the ballpark. And then I go, well, how much money do you have saved? And they go, I think I have like 200,000 saved. Well, you find out it's way less than that. A great place to start, all improvement starts with telling the truth. All improvement. Doesn't matter where you're at. I don't care if it's health. I don't care if it's dentistry. Start with telling the truth. And you actually have kind of a way for them to tell the truth and start to analyze this. So walk us through that, Travis. First of all, what is this tool that you're going to give us? And then what is it that you do?
Well, yeah, you can go to studentloanplanner.com/calculator, and this is the thing that we use actually in our consulting service, and we give it away for free. And we give it away for free because we figure a lot of the folks are going to look at it and see that they're really straightforward refinancing candidates, and then they just use our refinancing links and get cash bonuses and get lower rates that way. And then we would make money on that. And so then the other thing is the consulting. People look at that calculator, which you can download and take a look at it and punch your numbers into and see what it's saying. And then if it's saying something that looks really confusing to you, then that's when people kind of hire us to explain it, right? So a little tip for people: if you go to nslds.ed.gov, that if you log into that, you might have to reset your password. That's going to tell you all of your federal debt. So it's going to show you your principal. It's going to show you your interest. So just add those 2 numbers together, add those 2 columns together. That's what you have in total. The only exception to that is if you have a loan at ECSI. That's a loan from the Department of Health, which can also be added into your debt that can be forgiven if you know what you're doing. So just go to those places. That's going to be the majority of where you're going to find all the stuff that you owe, so you can get that truth telling, and then you can punch whatever number you find into that calculator and figure it out if you think you can do it yourself or if you need some help.
So if you're listening to this and you're driving, which a lot of people do, they're like, I was driving and I didn't hear that. So if you're driving, don't worry about it. You can find those in the show notes once you're stopped. And then also, let's say I am one of the people that's overwhelmed once I enter this calculator. What do you do and how can you help me get out of this?
Yeah, studentloanplanner.com/help. So for $400 to $600, depending on how much you owe, we'll figure it out for you. Like I said, we've done 3,000 plans. Our model is doing a ton of volume, and that's kind of what we're passionate about. So we probably 90% of the time we're going to find a dentist at least 50,000 in projected savings because this stuff is pretty complicated. And the people that only owe $100,000 usually self-select out of that, just refinance their debt and don't talk to us, which is totally fine. So, I would say that if you do owe any kind of six-figure amount and you're, at all uncertain about some of the stuff, like if you didn't understand that Wisconsin versus Kansas example, you probably need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you owe over $200,000 and you didn't understand that example, that just shows you how complex it is, and there's something that you could miss.
Right.
So, and for the folks out there that just need to refinance, we have the best bonuses basically for refinancing on the internet because we take a lower commission than everybody else does. So we're able to kind of rebate some of that back to the person who refinances.
Yeah, that is awesome. So I'm going to encourage you, if you're watching this, just check it out and at least enter the information on the loan calculator. And Travis, we are going to have you back. Now, again, for the benefit of people that might be listening to this, how can I contact you and just reach out to you, maybe ask you questions?
Yeah, so folks could reach out, help@studentloanplanner.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can hit me up there, Travis Hornsby on LinkedIn. But I think help@studentloanplanner.com, I'll definitely see it and I'll respond. One of our other team members might respond too. So part of the problem about doing a high volume business is you can't do all of it yourself. So we have a team of CPA, CFP, CFA people. There's 5 of them besides me on staff that also do our consultations. And I'm excited that we're able to attract that kind of a team because it's not just me kind of thinking through all these problems. Like we have, somebody that has that financial planning background. We have the tax person. Like we kind of look at everything to make sure that we have the best advice. And that's the only bad thing about paying for advice is if it's not the best, right? Like you want any advice you pay for to be the best. And so that's what we try to make sure we're doing.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome, buddy. Well, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate you. And stick around while we say goodbye to everybody else that's listening. But if you're watching today and you enjoyed today, which I know you did, just do us a favor, hit the share button, share this with your friends or another dentist who might be struggling with that and say, hey, check this out. Reach out to Travis. I know that you'll find a lot of value in there. Keep sending us suggestions for shows that you want to see, not only with Travis, but other guests. And you're going to see we're into the 3rd season. We've got some incredible guests lined up. We want to keep bringing you the best information in dentistry so you guys can create a better practice and a better life. So until next time, you guys have a great day and keep watching the Best Practices Show. You guys have a great rest of your week.